All right. Thank you for attending today's SLiTHER. Our speaker is a colleague of mine, Marilyn Mackiewicz at Oregon State University. And so this is very exciting for me because I consider Marilyn a friend, and it's also sunny out, so this is good luck here in Oregon. Marilyn's going to talk to us today about inclusive leadership based on her experiences throughout her professional career. And so with that, I will turn it over to Marilyn.
Thanks, Matt, for the introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here virtually online. I'm glad to see some of my colleagues also here as well. Matt thinks that we're friends, but I'm not so sure. And he just left, so we have to work on that friendship. But later, if he does his homework and watches this recording, he will know what I said. I wanted to start by giving an introduction into my background and myself and how I got into this work involved in inclusive leadership. This is not something that I do by profession, but it's something that I'm very passionate about, and I like talking about and sharing with my colleagues who are working on building, places where everyone has a sense of belonging. My full-time job is I'm an associate professor in chemistry in the materials chemistry program at Oregon State University. I am an associate professor, and I like to say that I'm an architect of all things small, which means I build tiny little things that we can use for biomedical applications. I also say I'm a box carrier because I think about equity quite a bit, and I feel sometimes we don't have a level playing field, and we might need a box to help some of our colleagues to stand so that they can see what we see. I also think that I'm a rule bender. I think sometimes rules keep us from moving forward, and so sometimes we either need to change the rules, break the rules, or bend the rules. And I also, because I'm a chemist, think about change, and I feel that we can all inspire people to be catalysts for change. So I hope today that this talk does inspire some people to bring about change in their own communities. As I said, I'm a chemist by training. I'm a bioinorganic chemist by training. And I started doing nanomaterials research when I was a postdoc and fell in love with it. And so this is my research space in nanomaterials chemistry. We design nanoparticles for biomedical applications. So we think about lots of different features of nanomaterials that we can use for biological applications. It's very important as we're designing these materials to study how they interact with biological systems. So studying their interactions with proteins and cells and in vivo is important for us because they help us to uncover how the features of the nanoparticles play a role in their toxicological behavior or their biological behavior in cells and also in animals. And I think this work is really important as if we're going to advance nanomaterials towards safe clinical translation. So we do all of these different types of studies in my lab using a multi-scale approach from in silico to in vitro to in vivo. But I'm not here to talk about this today. Maybe someday in the future, SLiTHER will invite me back to talk about my research more specifically and what we do. Today, I wanted to focus on inclusive leadership, why it's important, what it is, how you can become an active ally, and how we can create cultures where everyone has a sense of belonging. And I'm going to give very specific examples of how you can do this based on work that we are doing here in the chemistry department at Oregon State University. I thought I would jump straight into the why by showing data. Data is very powerful. Data allows us to learn and also make informed decisions. And I wanted to share some data about specific categories of people of interest. We have seen a shift in STEM fields where when it comes to gender, that you see more and more women in STEM classes. In fact, when you look at some of the data, you see that there's almost equal 50-50 amount of people in class that are either identifying as men or women, and then we have other gender identities represented, but they're a much smaller community. So while there is a shift when it comes to female identifying and male identifying folks in STEM fields, you still see a very disproportionate amount of people from different gender identities, but also based on representation, either from Black, Indigenous, or people of color, so BIPOC people in science and engineering. In chemistry, I don't think that, I think that there's improvement in chemistry, but you certainly see a much larger disproportionation in engineering. So if you look at this data shown here, you can see this in terms of US citizens and permanent residents, we still have both at bachelor's level and doctoral level, a lower amount of people that identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color in science and engineering fields. You can also see that it's not just representation, but even those that make it through STEM fields and have jobs in different STEM professions, that in terms of earnings, there is a disproportionate amount of money that's given to different people. So you see, while white and Asians make a lot more money with the same degrees and same experience, you see that Black and Hispanic folks, also based on gender, for the data collected here on men and women, that they also earn less for the same amount of degree, and also with the same expertise or level of expertise. So there's a big difference here in earnings for these folks. In addition, you also see in terms of leadership positions that there is a lack of representation of BIPOC folks, particularly in leadership positions like major CEOs of companies like HP, Yahoo, Intel. So the folks occupying these leadership positions are either Caucasian, followed by Asian, but BIPOC folks in particular, there's a less than 5% representation. So what's clogging up the pipeline, not only in STEM profession, leadership positions, for both women and BIPOC folks and folks with different gender identities. There's a lot of different data that's out there highlighting why folks are not advancing to higher leadership positions, and then earning STEM degrees as well. And I wanted to share some data. There's a lot of data out there. I don't think we need to collect more data, but there are folks in this space of work that think that data is really important, and there still needs to be collection of data, and that's true because we don't capture everybody when we're collecting data. So definitely collecting more data is important. But from the data that already exists, you can see there's a number of reasons why people leave STEM fields or don't feel a sense of belonging in their STEM professions. And just looking at what women have reported based on data that was collected, you can see that in terms of, having to provide, in terms of how they feel, for example, and having to provide more evidence of competence than others to prove themselves, you see that women, particularly Black women, feel like they have to prove themselves a lot more in their STEM profession. And then in terms of colleagues that suggested that they should work fewer hours, Asian and white women have been told that you should work fewer hours, whereas you don't see that with Black women or Latina women, because these women are the primary breadwinners, and there's no options for them really to stay at home when they have children. When you look at, women who find themselves pressured to play a stereotypical feminine role, you see that Asian women and white women feel that pressure, whereas you don't see that same pressure with Black women. And then when you look at the work environments about how women support each other, you see that Latina women tend to find more support in their community, as well as Asian and white women. But there's Black women feel they don't have that same level of support from other female counterparts. And this is just focusing on females, not women who identify or folks that identify as female. So I apologize if we don't have that data. But you can see there's differences even in one gender of how based on race how women feel. And there's even women who have been misidentified as custodial staff. So you see that more with Black and Latina women than Asian and white women at their work environment. So you can just imagine how these women feel when they have to identify in these different roles, or when they're being told, like, you should work fewer hours now that you have a family, as if their careers are not as meaningful to them. There's other data that was collected by the NIH when it comes to looking at folks that are transitioning from postdoctoral training to faculty positions. So looking at specific underrepresented groups. And in this data that was collected not too long ago in 2018, when they surveyed these folks from underrepresented backgrounds, that they identified that a lot of reasons why they don't transition to research intensive institutions is because of bias, lack of mentorship, personal finance, lack of diversity. So there's a number of reasons here, but you can see that bias, mentorship, and finances are one of the some of the reasons why you don't see them transition to major research intensive institutions. Some solutions that they think would be helpful for advancing into these research level 1 institutions include, the institutions taking responsibility for the folks and here they're talking mainly about retention at these institutions. So even when folks get into these positions in these R1 institutions, they don't stay very long. And it doesn't even have to be an R1 institution. A lot of folks leave their academic institutions. Mentorship is important for them, helping them transition once they get an award, networking, skills development, and another big one is inclusive environment. So all of these things are potential solutions for people to pay attention to if they want to retain folks from underrepresented groups at their institutions. So what I wanted to talk about today is the power of being inclusive, because I think if we can create inclusive environments where everyone can thrive, then we have a much greater chance of keeping women and folks from other gender identities, as well as BIPOC folks in STEM professions, so they don't leave. And so the power of being inclusive starts with this spark to do better, to help support each other, to learn and grow together, to contribute in meaningful ways, but also to think about equity and elevating voices of folks that are just softer in the room, that don't know or don't have the skills to advocate for themselves. And we really need to think about how we can advocate for other people with softer voices, especially if we want to keep folks in STEM professions, but also just to help people develop their potential as leaders. So diversity, equity, and inclusion are 3 topics you often hear about. And there's a lot of data that show that having diverse teams of people is very good for business. So it helps in innovation, creativity, and complex problem solving, especially most of our challenges, whether it's climate or energy, require solutions that you have multiple disciplines of people and people with different expertise and backgrounds to help solve those complex problems. But you can't have diversity or a diverse group of people working on these problems if you don't have a culture or a community that's inclusive. So if you can build in inclusive excellence, you can enhance engagement, productivity. People are just going to be happier in their work environments. It allows you to, really tap into good talent, build trustworthiness and community responsiveness to help everybody grow into inclusive leaders. But you can't have diversity and inclusive excellence without thinking about equity And equity is very important because we all don't come from backgrounds or have experienced life in such a way that we all have the same opportunities. So many of us have, very different upbringings, backgrounds, lived in different countries, different environments where we don't all have the same opportunities. So, as an employer or a community, it's our responsibility to help folks or help level the playing field for folks by providing good health resources, mental health, education, professional development, tools and resources to build new skills, access to those resources that everybody else has that they don't have, to focus on career development and building a sense of community. And I'm very community centered. I grew up in a country where we always think about community and the people around us, whether it's our neighbor next door or a distant relative. So it's been very difficult for me adjusting in the United States for the 30 plus years because I'm very community centered and I'm not always thinking about myself in a very individualistic way. So community is something I really enjoy building, and I think that it's very important. And community to me means team, and having different people with different skills and expertise, backgrounds, ways of thinking. All of these things for me is community. Okay, so how do we build this culture of inclusiveness to create these climates where everyone feels that they're valued and they can thrive? So what I wanted to do was introduce this new theory of change called the leadership continuum. This is not something I invented. This is work done by Jennifer Brown, who does a lot of work in inclusive leadership. And in her book and her workshop that she gives, she talks about the different stages in this new theory of change for inclusive leadership. And I just wanted to spend a little time here and go over these different stages, these 4 stages in this inclusive leadership continuum, so that you can gain an understanding of where these stages are, or maybe where you might be in these stages. And everybody is a little bit different. But the thing about this leadership continuum is that you can start at stage 1 and then, work your way to stage 2, 3, and 4, and then find yourself back at stage 1. So this is continual growth in yourself as an inclusive leader. So in the first stage, the unaware stage, in this stage, you're not even aware that there are people around you that work with you that are having difficulty in their working environment, that some things are more difficult for them than it is for you. Most people here think that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a compliance thing that we all have to do in our workspace. And as you can tell, that in some states, these things are being significantly rolled back and in a place where you're not even allowed to mention diversity, equity, and inclusion at all. They're very bad words in some places. And that's not everywhere, but these things are being talked about significantly in many different places. I think we all saw how important this was in 2020 with with the death of George Floyd. And so you saw a huge activism in why we need to build inclusive cultures and why diversity and equity is important. And if you're paying careful attention, that topic is still important, but you see a shift in how we're discussing things depending on the states that you live in. So in some cases, in the unaware stage, people just are not aware that other people are having difficult, lives or work environments. Some people think that diversity and equity is a compliance thing. And then some people either go silent, or some people just are very against having a discussion about diversity, inclusion, and equity. In the aware stage, you now begin to see, and this was, what happened in 2020, this awareness that there is a lot of folks where marginalized folks where you see a lot of things with health disparities when you saw people from BIPOC communities and Native American communities were dying off much more rapidly than other folks who had better healthcare. And so in this stage, like it awakened everybody. And I would say COVID and the pandemic didn't just awaken the stage. If you look throughout our history in the 60s with things that happened in LA, in lots of different communities, you see this awakening, and then you see that we stop the conversation until something bad happens again. So, this is work that you continually have to do. You're awakened, but then you have to do something to make things change for people from different communities. So here you can be awakened, but the way forward is to go into this active engagement stage where you're working on making your community more inclusive and welcoming. And then in the advocacy stage, this is a stage where you're going to build your DEI muscles even further, where you're more outspoken and you're worried less about risk, and you're trying to change things from a systems level, like laws or policy in the institutions or the work environment that you're at. And again, this is a continuum, so that as you become more aware, you move out of the unaware stage. And I'll give you an example of a stage where I'm quite aware of gender and racial bias that prevents other folks from moving up, but I wasn't quite aware of all of the different things that folks from transgender communities face. And a friend of mine and their own experiences taught me a lot about how important it was to speak for folks or to help advocate for folks from the transgender community. But I would not have known all of the hoops and barriers that they have to jump through for basic care, whether it's mental health or just like name change or anything that we take for granted. So I take for granted as a woman. So this was really important, being I was in this unaware stage, and through my interactions with my friend who is transgender, it led me to awaken and then work on things to help bring about more inclusive communities and work on change in policy to help folks from other communities that were struggling. Okay. So when we think about diversity, I think often we think about people's languages, their voice, physical traits, tone, appearance, but there's so many different dimensions to diversity that we often don't see. And these things include gender, sexual orientation, age, work ethic, religion, experiences, education, abilities, talents. There's a lot of dimensions to diversity that we are often not thinking about. So I wanted to bring this up because while we think about some of the physical things or language and appearance or even accent, there's so many people that hide who they truly are or their background. And it takes a lot of energy to hide who you are. So if you're not living your true self, then you're spending so much effort to just fit in around everyone that your potential is being overshadowed. You're not living your true potential in your work environment. And so you can't be productive. You can't be innovative because you constantly are spending a lot of energy hiding who you really are. If you didn't have to do that and you could be your authentic self, you could really show who you are and your potential can really shine. Okay, so how do you move from the unaware stage to the aware stage? And there is a number of things that you can do to move your way from that unaware stage into the aware stage. One of which is to find your way into a conversation to learn. So the folks showing up here today are here to learn. They want to to broaden their knowledge. And so anything that you could do, like show up to a talk, read a book, have conversations with people who are different from you, allows you to find your way into the conversation and allows you to move beyond good intentions. Because folks recognize that other people from marginalized communities are having difficulty, but often don't even know what to do or how they can be supported. And they feel, I want to do something to make my community better, but there's a difference between having good intentions and actually doing the work to make changes. So finding your way into conversations, listening to other people, forming personal connections, this is the first step. As you're doing that, remember to be humble. You're going to make mistakes, and I think one place that early in my leadership continuum, just getting people's gender pronouns correctly. Sometimes I still forget when I meet a student and they're going through a transition and their pronouns, one, are not open. So I share my pronouns because I want other folks to be able to share their pronouns with me and feel comfortable doing so. And it's very important for me to recognize different gender identities in my classroom and to make sure that I say my students' pronouns correctly. But there are times I'm going to make a mistake. So I apologize immediately. And then I just learn and I just make myself remember, don't forget that this is this person's pronoun or this is how you say this person's name. So you're going to make mistakes. You have to learn from your mistakes and don't feel too guilty about it. Just keep, working on becoming aware and then actively trying to do something about it. You're going to hear different points of view. Certainly, I'm sharing my point of view today based on my experiences and my interactions with a number of different people. You're going to hear different points of view that are different from your own. And even if you don't agree with them, it's important to be respectful because you're listening to someone's lived experience. Try not to explain a lot. Oftentimes, even if you recognize something about yourself, you try to explain, well, no, I don't really feel that way. Or no, you shouldn't think about it that way. Stop explaining. Things are the way they are. And I think it's important to move past trying to explain things or feeling guilty about something and just learn and be humble. Focus on learning, not judgment. And then try to understand some common deflections that would keep you in the unaware stage. And I'm going to go through some of those deflections that could keep you in the unaware stage in just a minute. Understanding bias. So bias is ingrained in every one of us, including myself, right? Based on where I grew up and how I grew up. And so understanding that where you grew up might shape unintentional biases and microaggressions are really important if you're going to move yourself out of that unaware stage into the aware stage and active stage. Most of us aren't aware of some of the things that we say or do that are unintentional, unconscious bias. And then surround yourself with a trusted few people to help you. So by this, I don't mean go find, if you want to learn more about folks from different communities or BIPOC folks, I'm not saying go find someone that you can ask them questions to. Like, it's really important to build authentic relationships with people so that you can learn from them and understand them. So I always find myself just engaged with a lot of different people and being respectful. And do not discuss how you stereotype if it has happened. Just leave it alone. Your goal is to learn how you can not make those mistakes and move forward. All right. So common deflections that keep you in the unaware stage. I just wanted to go over some of these. So for example, and you might have heard some of this in your work environment, I'm buried. I don't have time to prioritize this work. And as someone who is on our EGI committee, as you'll see later, we have EGI charges and all of our committees in our department, and we find that some of the committees or maybe all of the committees are not doing the work, right? They're not prioritizing work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you have to ask why. So we're going to try and find out why. But sometimes you'll hear, I don't have time to prioritize this work. We're all overwhelmed. Or you think, oh, I don't think we have significant issues here. I prefer to see past, race, gender, or color. We're all just people. But really, can you not see color? If I gave you 4 squares and 3 of them were orange and 1 was green, you're going to tell me you don't see that green is different? One of these colors are different. So we all recognize color differences. It's not something we're focused on intentionally, but we do recognize that there is differences. So saying that, you see past race, gender, and color, you can't see past it. It is there. You have to recognize it. This is the way we've always done things. There's another one. It's not my fault. I can't pronounce their name, or you've forgotten someone's pronoun. I didn't mean to offend anyone. I'm fair-minded. She's a woman, so that's probably why she was hired. We can't hire people of color to fill the diversity requirement. We have a head of diversity and inclusion. So we're already dedicated to making changes. Or you have an EGI committee, so we're already dedicated to making changes. But if your committee hasn't really made any changes, can you really say that? We have mandatory unconscious bias training for all our employees, so we've already addressed that issue. But I'll tell you, you can have all the unconscious bias training you want. If you don't put anything into practice, then all of it goes out the window. So the training is important, but being able to put that training and that knowledge into practice through changes in policy and practice is what's going to really make the difference here. Okay. So in the unaware stage, your goal is to understand your bias and ask yourself these questions. This is the place where you can start. Where am I exposed to difference? Where can I go to meet different people? Am I intentional about placing myself in new communities and conversations? If so, which ones? In the past, I've assumed that I'm doing enough on the topic of inclusion. And in which areas do I need to build my knowledge? So these are, questions that you can ask yourself. You can ask yourself, where is bias intruding on my ability to be an effective colleague, leader, or friend? So these are all some questions that you can ask yourself to really understand it. And I forgot to mention, Jennifer Brown used to have an assessment that you can take that helps you figure out where you are in the unaware, aware, active, or advocacy stage. But I think the link is broken and it's not working well. I tried to get some of my colleagues to take it and it's not working. And I reached out to them, but no one's responded back to me about fixing the link. But it's also a good place to start to learn more about yourself and where you are. Sometimes most of us are in between the unaware and aware stage. We just don't know, or we're in the aware and active stage. But it's a really good survey. I wish that I had that link to share with you today. But it's another place to begin to understand your bias in yourself. And also there are implicit bias assessments too that you can take. They don't, there's challenges with them, but they are also a good place. So in this second stage, if you want to move from the unaware to the aware stage, you're going to hear things or learn things about yourself that you probably are not going to be happy with, and that's okay. I think the way you move from this stage is to begin with empathy. So empathy begins with understanding life from another person's perspective. Nobody has an objective experience of reality. It's all through individual prisons. So while you might have a different experience, being open to listening to other people's, stories is really important. And by starting with empathy, you can really understand life from another person's perspective. And so this is a place that you want to start as you go from unaware to aware state. Recognize that not everybody has the same story. Okay. So as you move from unaware to aware stage, you want to shift your perspective. So it's important to keep an open mind, and to be curious to different people from different, curious to different communities of people. Actively listen to their story, and again, practice empathy. I think everybody can understand someone's story because you have your own stories to share. So I'm confident that you can learn to be empathetic by listening to other people's story, absorb knowledge around new identities. So as I said before, I didn't quite understand, the difficulties that my transgender friend was going through their entire process, and being able to talk to them about everything that they were experiencing was very helpful to me for my own understanding, to help me to be a much more supportive mentor and colleague and friend as they were going through this difficulty. So I was very fortunate to be able to have someone to share their experiences with me, and I'm so grateful for it. So I think be willing to absorb new knowledge about different identities or different communities. You're always going to be learning about people, their backgrounds, and barriers. So humility is key. You will hear unpleasant things that you're not going to be happy with. And as I said, there are a lot of folks that hide who they are. A survey shows that 61% of employees feel that they need to cover who they are. 50% of LGBTQ employees remain closeted in their workspace. So I think it's important because not everybody feels comfortable sharing who they are in their workspace, because they certainly don't feel that sense of belonging and community where they can readily share who they are. So you might find that, there are a lot of people that you work with that are struggling to actively be engaged in their community. Okay, so you'll learn that some of the reasons why people are not engaged is because they're hiding who they are. And so it could be that you've caused some of these things also. So be kind to yourself, and learn from mistakes and learn from knowledge and move forward. Okay. Your experiences shaped you and will give you a unique voice to champion others. So if you're keeping an open mind to actively listening, not explaining things, and being supportive or asking how you can be supportive, then you will grow your DEI muscles. Remember that you may have struggled in some ways that others have not. So being empathetic and being able to help others will be very important to you and to the communities that you're trying to help. Understanding your privilege is very important in the aware stage. Privilege is something that is afforded to certain people by society and in the workplace, offering invisible benefits that other people do not have. If I think about my own self, I came from a community or a family, a very different community than the one I currently live in. As I said, I grew up in a very close-knit community. I didn't experience racial bias at all because everybody in my family is from different backgrounds, different religion. So I think I grew up in a very multicultural, multi-ethnic community in the Caribbean. That's where I'm from. I'm from Trinidad. So I didn't experience, I guess, racism until I came to the United States of America. And that really made me think about how fortunate and privileged I was growing up in a small Caribbean island with different people, but also different religion. So my family is quite diverse in religion, in background, and even growing up in the United States as a first generation woman from a very low socioeconomic background, I'm not in that place anymore. I'm in a privileged background. I'm an educator. I have a great job. I make good money. I'm in a place of privilege that I can help other students like myself that came from that background. So I recognize where I'm from, but also the privilege that I have to help other folks. So you might want to ask yourself what privileges you have that others might not have, and how you can use your place um, or your place of privilege to like help other people. Acknowledge your claim or lack thereof to special advantages. Um, some people experience pushback. Privilege does not mean, or you might have a tendency to push back, but privilege doesn't invalidate how hard you work to get where you are. I've worked really hard to get where I am today, and I feel that all that hard work has paid off, and I'm in a place that I can help other people. So I'm not going to invalidate, how hard I've worked to get where I am. I recognize that other people might have it harder. And so because I'm in this place of privilege, it's my responsibility and I think honor to like help other people who might be struggling more than me. So it's just an acknowledgement. Your privilege is just an acknowledgement of where you are and how you got here. Some people might have to work harder to achieve what they have in the world. That's all it is when you're acknowledging privilege. So I would say one thing you could do is a privilege walk or a privilege scale to like help you and your community recognize what their privileges are, but it's a little dangerous doing this sometimes because you really begin to see the disparity, or I guess the differences in different privileges, and it might make people feel uncomfortable or guilty because they recognize they have more privileges. So if you can find ways to do this in a psychologically safe environment where everybody's comfortable sharing and recognizing where they came from and where they are now, then that's a good aim to have. Okay. So in this aware stage, stories of origin, I think it's important to know what your life was like growing up. I often share my experiences with my students, where I grew up, how I got here. Because I think if you only look at me now, you think I've had a good education, I'm from a wealthy background. You don't know my whole story at all. And I wasn't really comfortable sharing my story, or maybe I wasn't comfortable. I just wasn't thinking about my story until students asked me to give a talk to share my background. And I realized, wait, I have a whole life that I've never shared. And I can tell you that even my in-laws who know me, they know me since I started dating my husband, always thought that I had this like privileged background. I never had to work a day in my life. I have a PhD. And I'm like, wait, hold up, wait. I grew up poor. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with 5 people, and that's how I went to college, right? And I had to work 3 jobs to pay for school. So I feel like it's important to share my background, where I come from, to help others know that, or I help people feel comfortable sharing their own stories, but also to let them know that I understand where they feel. Like I can empathize with them. So some people might not have the same hardship. So I think stories are really important in helping shape who you are, but also shaping others and being supportive to others. I think stories also help you recognize or help you determine when you felt the sting of exclusion in your life also. So even though some of us grew up in privileged communities, I think we can all find some single story where you didn't feel like you were included in something. And I think that story of exclusion helps you build empathy when you're hearing about other people's stories. So recognizing how you felt or at that time and how you navigated that is really important, because it also helps you to become more empathetic towards other people. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to mention is intersectional allyship. I don't know how familiar everybody is with this word intersectional allyship, but it's really important. Intersectionality means multiple stigmatized identities. For example, I identify as a woman and I identify as a woman of color. I also I came from a low socioeconomic background as well. But those are just maybe 2 or 3 of my identities. There are other folks that have multiple identities. For example, you can be a woman or identify as a woman, identify as a person of color, and also identify as a queer person of color. And so the more intersectionality there is, or the more identities you have, you find that there is more barriers. Okay, so each term has implications in a person's practical ability to be openly authentic and to be treated equitably. They experience different disadvantages and advantages. They can be oppressed and they can be an oppressor without even knowing it. It can be unintentional. You can have stigmatized identities and still be privileged. As I said, I feel like I'm in a privileged position because of the education I have. And it allows me to have a comfortable life, but I didn't always grow up that way. And regardless of intersectional identities, we can all be an ally. So I feel that I can be an ally to first generation students that identify as female or male. I can identify or support or be an ally for people from transgender community, but I would never presume to speak on anybody's behalf because I don't think that's my place. I think my place is to be an advocate and an ally and to be supported and to help others self-advocate for themselves. Okay. In the aware stage, you're also interrupting bias. So we are not just challenging ourselves, but we're challenging, how we're raised, our communities. Bias can be deep rooted in some communities. And it's not something you can completely get rid of, but you can generate awareness. So once you learn of a type of bias, you have 2 options. You can continue or you can do something to change it. And then unconscious bias is training, and it creates those aha moments, and people feel really passionate once they learn about different biases or different microaggressions or macroaggressions. But without any change in policy or procedure, this is going to fail. We go back right to where we were, right? And you see this throughout historical points in our history in the US where something happens, we get charged, we try to make changes, we get someplace, but there's so much inequity and bias that still exists. We're not completely removing. And then we go back to the same place again. The only way things really change is if we change policy and procedure. And as you can tell in our current climate, there's lots of changes in policies and procedures that are happening depending on the state that you live in. Recognize when your bias and your behaviors are not serving you. Sometimes it's very difficult for you to recognize that for yourself. And it might take someone, a friend perhaps, pointing out to you that, hey, you said this, and then you might not have recognized that you said something that could be hurtful. So hopefully you have a friend, a trusted friend that can help you recognize your bias or behaviors that are not serving you. And then silence continues to harm. The more we stay silent or about things, or if we see something and don't say anything about it and then talk about it after, that's still silence. You're not making any changes by staying silent or by not pointing it out. And the way you do this is by just being collegial and cordial when you have to point out something that you think isn't right or is biased. There's no need to be aggressive about it because, again, lots of times we say things we don't intend to say because we didn't choose our words correctly. So lots of times things might sound like, well, that was a microaggression. So when you're thinking about what you hear, challenge, you're like, okay, where did that come from? Did they not choose their words correctly? Is that how that person really feels? Can this be something I can talk to that person about? I'm like, ah, Joe, you said the following. Did you really mean that? And then oftentimes go, oh my God, no, that's not what I intended to say. That's not how I meant it to come off. So I think there are really good ways that allows you to challenge biases, but also microaggressions that are unintentional. Okay, so moving from the aware stage to the active engagement stage, this is a stage that I think lots of people are in, but some people are not, but want to get there. So how do you get there? Where do you start? Mentoring and sponsoring is a good place to, once you're in this awareness stage and you feel like you have some good foundation and knowledge and you want to do something, mentoring and sponsoring is a good way to make you become an active ally, becoming a better storyteller, more voices that are heard. So bringing in people with different voices, different opinions, and different expertise is very important. Tapping into your why is important, and then centering underrepresented storytelling. So I'm going to say there's a caveat to centering underrepresented storytelling. Because oftentimes, and I experienced this myself, I was asked to give a talk because 2020 happened and everybody wants to do something when it comes to diversity and equity and show that we are not biased. We have people of color in our work environment, so we hear their voices, and they start asking every person of color or every woman they can find to come and give a talk. Okay, so I'm going to tell you, I'm giving this talk here. That's because I'm friends with Matt. And this is also important for me. So I don't usually just, give this every day of my life. I'm a scientist. But I do like helping my friends and people interested in this work, and students interested in this work. So I feel like if I can share some knowledge that will be helpful, then I do these types of talks. So I'm very careful of when I do these talks, because I recognize that it just becomes a lot. Like, you spend your time then doing all of these talks or doing talk for other people just because they need to, hit that checkbox. So if you're intending to invite someone from a marginalized community to give a talk, recognize the time that they're taking to do that talk. Figure out ways that you can make it a meaningful experience for them. And also, especially if it's a talk on diversity and equity and inclusion, give them an honorarium, right? Make them feel their time and their experience and their stories are important, and it's something that you will learn from. So just keep an open mind to that sometimes people in this space, in this DEI space from these marginalized communities, can be overtaxed. So every way that you can notice your own victimization or the ways that you've been marginalized, you can access feelings that other people might be having. And that includes being a male or a white male, right? Like, my husband is white, but he grew up from a very poor background. He recognizes, where he came from and also what his own privilege is. So everybody has experience of inclusion, including him, and that makes him a much more powerful advocate for the people in his group, especially the women in his group, and the people of color that is in his group. And so if you can, remember that experience of exclusion, maybe it's not around a group identity, maybe it's not around an individual experience, recall that feeling, because then it reminds you of your privilege and what you can do to help other people that might be experiencing exclusion on a daily basis all the time in everything that they do. Not just it happened once a month. There are people that experience inclusion almost every single day of their lives because of the communities that they're in. And it's just very difficult, mentally exhausting, and emotionally taxing. Okay, I have to somehow hit the little button here. Okay. So what do inclusive leaders do? I really like this graphic here because these are some things that you can do when you're thinking about building inclusive environments, seminars, lots of things. So how do you support women and underrepresented folks from marginalized communities? And it is not just through words, but it's through action. Okay, actions speak louder than words. We all know that. So, what are some things that you could do to be advocates and allies? And so, I like this table here. I'm not going to go through all of these because I want to stay on time. Wait a minute. How long have I been talking? There is no way it's 5:15, right? 5:15. How long do I have?
Not where I am, Marilyn, but
Okay.
you keep going. It's great stuff. So,
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to give a few examples here because I want to show you how my EGI committees really put things into practice through action. So, for example, you can be a photographer, call out sexist or racist images in stories or news on your campus and your org and committees. If you are organizing a conferences, really think about who you're going to invite to be on a panel or to be presiders or to be speakers at that conferences. Sometimes I look on Twitter and I look at who the panelists are and I'm like, what's wrong with this picture here? You're not including everybody's voices. Referee, take a strong stance against those that abuse privilege. Mentor people from different backgrounds. Okay, you can do that. That's a great place to build good relationships with people. It is through mentoring. Be a bookworm. Read on implicit bias. Read about stereotype threat. Read about inclusive teaching practices. We're going to talk about book club that we started in our department. Wordsmith, adjust content in your org to show respect, to URM women, URM and women. Be a listener, give women voices and space without interruption. You do not need to jump in all the time. You can just sit there quietly. My husband does this all the time, and he's kind of asked me for some advice on things. He gets invited to go to career panels and leadership that are just focused on women, and he's the only man in the room. And oftentimes what he does is he just stays silent and he listens. And when someone wants to talk to him and ask his opinion, then he is able to say something. But he doesn't go in to fix everything or give opinions or tell people what to do. He's often listening to people. So this is also a good place to start, is through listening. And then megaphone, amplify women and URM voices in meetings and social media or talk. Okay. So in the advocacy stage, this is where your DEI muscles are really going to flex. This is where you start thinking about changing policy and procedure at the institutional level or the state level. This is where you go to marches, where you're openly talking about change, where you're not so worried about consequences for being an advocate or an active ally. Okay. You're looking at things at a systems lens at your institution or other institutions or at your state level. The messenger matters. And then realize that this is really hard work and you're going to weather the storm. So change does not happen very fast. Change is slow, and you're going to have to be patient as you're trying to make change. And sometimes you're going to realize that you fall right back down and you have to start all over again. So you're going to have to weather the storm because change is very slow. And I've learned I have to have incredible patience when I want to see change. And I also realize I can't do everything that I want to do to help everybody in my community all at once. So we tackle things one by one in our EGI committee, and I'll share that with you. Okay, changing culture from a systems level, what do you need to do here? This really is changing policy. So you might have to be a plumber to change policy and culture to retain women and URM. So it's not enough to say that we need to do retention, but how are you going to do retention? What can you do to keep folks from leaving their academic environment or their industry environment? Tie performance reviews to making diversity gains in your organization. So in our position descriptions at OSU, everybody has to do diversity and equity work or inclusion work. And it's part of our performance review. We're still in that phase of trying to get everybody to do this. But it's really difficult in this space when you realize that we ask folks to make changes in their organization and they don't know where to begin. They don't have the knowledge, they don't have the skills. So you have to find some ways, whether it's in your department, in your college, to provide space to build skills for people if you're going to ask them to do this work. Don't form a committee and say, okay, you're the EGI committee and this is what you're responsible for. Your committee needs to be able to figure out how they're going to do this work, and it needs skills, and you need to be able to provide that in your organization. Advocate, encourage fellow persons of privilege to become active allies to create equity. Join in conversations in organization and focus on elevating and uplifting people with softer voices. Track promotions and exits of URM and women. Review salaries, right? By gender, by diversity. So these are all work that you can do, and there's various communities or committees in your organization that you can become active participants in to help do some of these systems level policy changes and practices. Okay, so now I wanted to shift gears because, telling you that here are all the things that you could do is not enough. I wanted to show what my committee actually does at OSU and work that I've done on my own as well. So I'm going to give you 2 levels of things I've done to build inclusive cultures in my research teams, but also what how I worked with my EGI committee to build their DEI muscles and the work that we're doing at OSU in the chemistry department. Okay, so I grew up in this wonderful, privileged community by having this amazing mentor in graduate school. And my job as a graduate student was to build my scientific identity. And my advisor really helped me build this really strong scientific identity and taught me how to be a really good scientist. And I thought this is all I needed until I became an investigator and had my own research lab and realized, wait a minute, I had more to give here than just my knowledge in science. My background, my stories really resonated with students from the Lowestoft Alliance for Minority Participation and the McNair program. And these students really triggered something in me that made me realize that I was just more than a scientist. I was a scientist who walked in their shoes, from a low socioeconomic background, a first-generation student, an immigrant. And I wasn't sharing that story. And I don't think it was from embarrassment or anything. I was just so tunnel vision into growing as a scientist that I wasn't really recognizing where I was and the impact that it had on students who came from similar backgrounds to me until they pointed it out. And this was my trigger into and my awakening into the work that I was going to do with my own students. So over the years, as a PI, I always had students in my group and other people's group from around the campus that I didn't even know would come to me and ask me questions. How do I navigate interactions with other scientists and non-scientists? How do I ask for new research projects? How do I handle my lab mate that I'm having a conflict with? I feel like an imposter. I didn't even know what an imposter was. And so they would tell me, like, I don't feel like I belong here. I am not smart. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly how I felt at their age. I was not smart. And I was just like winging it. How do I handle microaggressions that make me feel undervalued? How do I network and find mentors to help me in my career? How do I talk to my professors? Yes, I had students ask me, Dr. Mack, how do I talk to my professors? I don't know if I can talk to them. Everyone seems smarter than me. Okay? I don't belong here. These were all things that I had myself when I was their age and had questions and felt the same. And I felt it was my responsibility to help my students with their struggles. And in my own career, I was going through this phase where I felt invisible and I didn't think anyone knew that I existed as a scientist in my institution. And I went to a workshop by the coach program with Jerry Richmond, which triggered a huge change in everything that I was going to do moving forward. I took a negotiation workshop and I sat there in this workshop and then with all these chairs and faculty from different departments and different schools and college. And I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, how are we now learning about negotiation? Aren't we kind of old to be learning this? Like, shouldn't someone have taught us this in school, like in grad school or undergrad? So I came home from that workshop and I was like, I'm going to teach all my undergraduate students about negotiation because it is more than just advocating for a salary or promotion. This is about how to deal with difficult people, like how to ask for things that you want, how to ask for help. So I started building, a research lab where I wasn't just going to teach my students how to be scientists. I had this bright idea in the summer to create these series of workshops in the summer that talked about research, literature, professional development, and writing. And so I created content on how to negotiate, how to build leadership skills, how to network, right? I didn't realize how important networking was until a friend of mine said, Marilyn, you should go talk to the dean. And I'm like, why? Why? The dean doesn't know me. Like, why would I want to do that? Or I should talk to the provost. Why would I want to talk to the provost? And I could hear their voices in my head go like, you should do this. So I made myself get out of my uncomfortable position because most people think I'm very social and extroverted. I hate being in front of people. I don't like public birthday singings. I'd rather hide from people. And the fact that Matt's going to put this on YouTube makes me terrified also. So I'm very much an introvert, but I know that I needed to build networking skills and connect with people. So I started teaching my students this in the summer, building my own content as I was learning. And then I eventually built this into a full-blown course, and I actually have a paper on how I did this. So if anybody wants to learn how to provide professional development skills for their research students in the lab, check out this paper. It's not an ASAP anymore. I should change that. It's actually in JComEd, and I talk about how I did this in my own research lab to help other folks do it. I actually built courses that talked about all of these communication skills. There's a number of different courses that I've built. And every time I survey students, they ask me the same thing. When I ask them, what strengths do you want to build? They said, I want to be able to talk in a professional manner. I want to learn how to interview, communication skills, time management, interpersonal skills, public speaking, networking, finding mentors, stress management. Every year, even to this day, when I do the same survey, I get the same thing. So teaching students these skills are really important. And they're not just skills for us. If you look at the top skills that employers are seeking, they're looking at communication as number one and active listening. The science stuff is down the list. Okay. Communication skills is number one. Professional development, leadership, these soft skills, which are extremely essential, are skills that employers are seeking. So being able to teach your students these skills are critical. So at OSU, we developed some classes on this. When I was at Portland State, where I was a faculty member, a non-tenure track faculty member for 12 years, I was so motivated by this biology professor who told me that there's no problem with women in STEM. And I walked away and I go, oh, great. I now know what my new class is. So I developed a capstone called Empowering Women and Underrepresented Students in STEM. And I did that class for about 3 years. And what I taught those students were all the professional development skills, how to self-advocate and how to find good mentors to support you in your career. And then those students would work with high school students. They designed their own workshop from Apprenticeship for Science Engineering and Girls Inc. We were just targeting the same set of students that look like us. First gen, students from marginalized communities, students with softer voices. We wanted to give them skills for them to be successful. Learning how to self-advocate, learning how to network, learning how to build good mentoring relationships, are my key to success. And I think it's very important for students from those communities. That course then launched the enrichment program in art for the Portland State Build Exito program, which is a $44 million program that takes students from very difficult communities, marginalized communities, students that have housing issues, the students that are going to leave college. And in this program, we help support them through undergraduate research experiences. And what I built is the enrichment programming arc to teach them how to self-advocate for themselves, how to be successful in research learning communities where they are the only person that looks like them. So it was through all of this content that I built there. And when I got recruited to Oregon State University in 2020, I was asked to do the same things. Can you build these courses and teach our chemistry majors how to be successful scientists? How do we retain them? How do we keep them connected to the chemistry department? So I have two courses, Careers in Chemistry and Transferable Skills for Chemists. And now 420X is now 520X. So we offer this to all of our new graduate students as well. And I teach all professional development because these are skills industry is looking for, so employers are seeking. And I also do this in my Night in STEM program at OSU. So this is where I take high school students in my research lab, which is very scary in the summer. And they do research for 1 week because working with high school students is a lot different. You cannot leave them alone. You must have 2 adults present. So it's a whole new challenge. But this is so empowering. Most of these students had never stepped foot on our campus, and they live right next door to our campus because they said, oh, we don't think we're supposed to come on the campus. And I said, why not? This is a public institution. You can like walk around here, go into the building, you check this place out. You belong here. So we teach them some of the same skills, but also teach them, hey, it is possible to pay for college. Here's how you're going to be able to afford college as a first-gen student from a low socioeconomic background. So we actually have a workshop on how you can be supported to go to college. And all of these students mostly are women or identify as women. We've had one guy, but all Hispanic students from our local community that come onto campus and work with us. And it is one of the most wonderful, empowering things we do every summer. So this is work that my lab does. Every one of my grad students and my undergrads from these similar communities are actively participating in it. So, you know, while you might not be able to extend yourself in a committee or institutional level, this is also a good place to start where you make a difference and you can be such a powerful person to help a student from this community. All right. In this paper, I talk about mentorship, but mentorship isn't enough. Building a student's scientific identity isn't enough. Building professional identity is also just as critically important. So both the scientific and the professional identity, which helps in long-term student success and retention, which I hope will lead to a much more diversified workforce. I have worked with over 50-something students at this point. 99% of those students are still in STEM professions, either in graduate school, in industry, pharmacy, medical school, dentistry. I kept track of all my students who stayed in my lab beyond 1 year and where they ended up. And I'm just so proud. This is my greatest accomplishment working in science, I think. All right, so I also work on the Equity, Justice, Inclusion Committee in the chemistry department. It was not my intent to join this committee, but we were in 2020 and we had an open forum. And I told my chair that I would be more than happy to help get people started in the discussion and then kind of see where everybody else is in the department, and I would be a consultant. Which then led to me and Doug Kessler taking over the committee. He was the chair of the committee, and somehow I became a member of the committee, and we broke off into 3 subgroups, and we all worked on different things. Doug and I worked on assessment of all our committees in the department and communicating the work we're going to do. And I also worked on a really big task on community engagement and practice. So not just making a plan for diversity, equity work, but we were going to start the work anyways, even without a plan. So this is kind of the reverse. what most people do, they do strategic planning and then they start doing the work and implementing. We did the reverse. We started a process called strategic doing, which I will introduce. My committee started with a number of different people. I told them if they showed up to do work in this committee, I would give them wine, and it worked, and I honored it. So I think the wine was the bonus for all the work, but they all showed up, these faculty members, and we have student representatives because their voices are just as critical to learn, educate themselves, and make changes. And most of these people are still actively engaged. Two of them are here, Lou Wyszynski and my new colleague, John Turst from our eCampus is here, and they are, John is new on our committee. We have different goals now, but we decided we wanted to lead the charge in diversity, equity, and inclusion and make big changes. And that's what we've been doing. To do this work, as I said, you can't assign a committee EGI work and then say, go. It doesn't work. I think you need to help your colleagues because, again, we're not all at the same level in the playing field. So one of my first jobs was to assess the team that I was working with and to build psychological safety because we were going to do difficult work that's emotionally charged. And so we started with an implicit bias assessment, recognizing our own biases and being able to share it. And psychological safety is really critical in this group. We did the inclusive leadership assessment to see where we were in the inclusive leadership continuum. The assessment, as I said, is no longer active. I hope that they'll make it active again because it's really good. It's also a really good book. And then we also did something called an innovation style assessment so that we know where everybody in the team was. They're either experimentalists or you have visionaries, explorers, or modifiers. So it kind of told me, who's going to be task oriented, who's going to be visionary. And then how do we learn all of those skills in the group? And then we started the next stage of it is to undergo a process called strategic doing. This teaches people how to do collaborations quickly to get people to move forward with measurable outcomes and adjust along the way. So typically you would do strategic planning. We're planning and doing at the same time. So it involves a different approach to strategic planning. This is strategic doing. So we're planning and doing at the same time. We do something called a Big Easy. The Big Easy allows us to accomplish goals. So we recognize this is where we are. There are a lot of ways to get where we want to be. There's a lot of ways on how we can get there. There's outcomes we want to achieve, but not everything we want to do is easy and going to be achievable. So we have to pick and choose. The way we do this is through this Big Easy process where we look at what we could do, what we should do, what we will do. Not everything we want to do, we can do or have the time or resources to. So we have to pick and choose. And then we give a time frame for the work that we're going to do. And then we assess. And then we think about how we're going to measure the outcomes and the impact. So in this Big Easy process, you come up with, you brainstorm, and then you rank what you're going to do in this little chart. So you want to do things that are high impact or not easy. This is not what you want to do, but you're going to have things that are very important to do that's going to have an impact, but it's not easy. Or don't have the resources. Or you can have things that you want to do, but it's going to have low impact and not easy, or things with low impact with high ease. But really what you want to be is doing things that have high impact and high ease. So we discuss each of those things that we want to do, and we rank them in this little box. And then this allows us to see what we can realistically do and give ourselves a time frame to do it with resources that we have to be able to do it. And then our goal is to measure the impact of what we're doing. So from this entire process, what would it look like if chemistry innovatively led the charge to change and create a culture of inclusion, diversity, and equity in the department, in the College of Science, and OSU? So everything that we do, we try to communicate and share so that people are not spinning wheels in other departments. So we're trying to actively work on communicating everything we do. And this is one approach, is giving a talk. Also putting it on our website and our alumni newsletter is the other places. So we're sharing what we do because we're also connected to the College Diversity Action Council. So what we're working on, we report to them, and we have a way to share with the other units in the college assignment. Okay, so in our first big easy, there was a lot of things we talked about, things that we recognized based on our open forum with faculty and students. We talked about an "Are you feeling lost" directory, because like the students don't even know who's in what labs or offices in our department. We don't have a clear directory. They often don't even recognize who are doing research and who is the teaching faculty at all. We had a wall that the students vehemently complained about that had all of our emeritus faculty, which was a wall with just faces that was about 50 white men and one Asian dude and no women. And the students hated this wall. And I understand why they hate that wall. I actually didn't even notice the wall until they pointed it out, and I went downstairs and then I was like, oh, okay, I see the problem here. Because I was just like in my little blinding world. I just got my blinders, going to the building, going to Milan, do my research. So I didn't notice this wall, and the students pointed it out. And then we decided that we didn't want to really get rid of our faculty because they worked here and they made this department the department that it is. But what was missing is their story on that wall. So we spent a lot of time digging through our archives, writing stories about each one of these faculty members. So we have a very different way of transforming that entryway now that is much more inclusive, that represents who we are, but not neglecting where we came from in the history of our department, that I'll show you. And the students didn't know, if I graduate from OSU, where is my future, right? Students didn't feel like they were connected to the department. There wasn't a space for them. So we worked on creating a space for them, showing them our successful alumni, and then creating undergraduate and graduate student spotlights so they can get to know each other. So I'm going to show you the results of this. This was a room in the basement that our emeritus faculty, poor guys, inhabited. And I don't even think they wanted to inhabit this space, to be honest with you. I wouldn't want to inhabit this space. It's kind of sad with this pink floor. And they graciously, without any hesitation, gave this room up so I could transform it for a space for our undergraduate students. And this is what that space now looks like. This is a space just for our undergraduate students to connect with each other. We have networking events here. They can study. They love this space. My undergraduate student on the committee, SLiThEr, helped design this space because it's specifically for students by a student. So this is a space, listening to our community, listening to what their needs are. This is the space just for our students so they can feel more connected to us in the department. That same undergraduate, we had a competition to create a new slogan for our department, and we had several really interesting submissions for the slogan, and then the faculty and students voted on what they wanted our slogan to be, and this is our new slogan, where diverse minds inspire endless innovation. This is a student slogan, so students came up with this slogan, and they won the competition. So this is on everything that we do, and it reminds us of who we are now and where we're headed in the future. This entryway does not have the spotlights with just our emeritus faculty. It doesn't look like this now. It's actually much more artistically pleasing, but we wanted to get something up there where we're highlighting our instructional faculty and our research faculty and our alumni that graduated every year and our emeritus faculty. So we really wanted to, transform this space so students see who we are and where we're headed, and the accomplishments of our faculty and what people are doing in the department so they can get actively involved in research experiences. I love this photo of Dr. Gable because it reminds me of a Time magazine look. And this is what we were going for, and he just happened to have that Time magazine look, and there's a QR code that links our students to the websites of the faculty. And this is an example of one of our accomplished alumni that talks about, what was so important to get an education here at OSU and what they're doing and how it's transformed their own careers. We are doing work besides the physical things in our department. So we did an assessment of all our committees, and every committee pretty much has an EJI charge to help develop more inclusive policies and practices, everything from grad advisement to curriculum development to awards, promotion and tenure track. We're still working on getting everybody to be invested in this. It's been very slow, so we're coming up with some new strategies. And I think one of the things that could be happening here is we haven't given the rest of our department skills to do work in this space. So we have a new plan coming up this year to create educational DEI learning communities in these different areas to help our faculty and our staff and instructors to actually do this work to create this change in policy. Last year, we also came up with a framework for the work that we were going to do surrounding inclusion, diversity, evaluating the work that we do, celebrating the achievements of our faculty, staff, and students, and to think about our strategic vision, which is very DEI embedded. And so a couple of things that came out that we're working on this year includes a industry university collaborative conference program called IUCCP. I like saying IUCCP versus the longer name that this allows our students to connect with our alumni and our executive advisory board, and also to network with people that they are interested in working for in the future. So we connect them with industry partners, all people, alumni from different companies such as Intel, Impria, Baliscore, HP, and this year we're having our second annual event. And we're also doing professional development workshops, highlighting our students at this conference. So this is an example of our first conference, which was really great. The students loved it. And many of these students are volunteering to help us with this year's conference. So we had this very impressively loud poster presentation. So I now have to get a bigger space for this event because it's just not going to cut it. So it's a very exciting time for our students in our department, and it's so great. This conference program didn't just impact our students. Our alumni were like, oh my gosh, why did we not have this when I was a student? So they're really invested in coming back to be engaged with our current students in the department. This is our plan for this year. So we went through another big, easy and strategic doing. So we have activities planned out in each of these 5 categories in our department or in our committee, and this is work that we're currently doing. One of the things that my colleague Lou Wojcicki and Paula Weiss has done is started a book group to talk about inclusive teaching practices and how we're going to shape our teaching to make sure that it's inclusive and welcoming and it's equitable. So we have a number of faculty and instructional faculty and tenure track faculty involved in book club to help us with developing some skills in inclusive teaching, and it's going really well. This is a really good book, by the way. So I hope some of you get this book because it's very empowering. And the last thing is shaping the future of our new colleagues in the department. So my colleagues Lou Wojcicki, Rich Carter, Paula Weiss, and I formed the Catalyst. The Catalyst is a mentoring program for our instructional staff and our tenure track faculty and our postdocs in the department, so that we can cultivate this ecosystem that shapes the next generation of scientists, leaders, mentors, and education. This is a way to support our new faculty in the department. We've got about 6 or 7 people that we're mentoring, and we have a list of topics. And then we're helping all of them in this mentoring style where we're doing peer-to-peer mentoring, on-site mentoring, and external mentors. So we're going to be doing mentoring in the spring. What are we covering in this mentorship program? You're here now. What? Teaching 101, the students are not the enemy. You're the boss now. What do you do? Serving strategically. An introvert's guide to being a faculty member. Demystifying promotion and tenure, which we just completed last week. Show me the money and getting yes, and don't keep it a secret. So these are just some of the topics in year one that we're covering with our faculty. So with that, I'm going to stop because that's my last slide. And if anybody's still here and wants, I know I'm over, to ask me any questions, I'll be happy to answer those questions.
Oh, well, thanks, Marilyn. That was awesome. I certainly appreciate it, and I'm sure other folks will in the future.
Yeah.
I wish we did have an honorarium that we were able to present you with, but we're in between funding right now, so
no worries about that because Matt is the honorarium.
oh, okay. Well, that's good to hear. But I will hit you with a quick question or two, just because you touched on some things that I've been trying to do and been thinking about. The space you converted, you went from the lovely pink floor to something a little bit more formal. Where did money for that come from?
My department head.
Okay.
My department head said, yes, let's do this. He didn't even give me a budget. I said, this is what I want to do. And he said, sure. So if you've ever been in Gilbert, Gilbert is a quite older building. That is the most modern space in all of Gilbert, besides my office and my lab. So my department head was really great. It took a lot of money, just $9,000 or $10,000 to do asbestos removal with the pink floors. But he funded, my chair at the time, Dr. Mike Lerner, funded all of it. And we have a very similar level of support from our current chair, Dr. Wade Kong. So they're invested in this. So
Okay.
I don't think there is any problem in investment there.
Okay. We also have at my institution a wall of oldness. We'll just put it that way. Unfortunately, it went up with the building, and it's sort of this holographic display that I keep finding people telling me no on changing because of the price. What is your kind of vision there for who's responsible for keeping things updated or moving forward?
Well, if Gilbert goes down, I guess we can move our frames with us. Some of those frames where our alumni from years are there, they still come into the department. We have to keep them. We have to find a space for them. We might, if we move to a new building, we might customize the frames differently, but I think our department would have the budget for that. They funded all of it. So we, our committee broke off into little teams and did all the digging. We're not done yet because we have 50 of them and more space to cover. Okay. So we did all the digging. We got anybody that was still alive that knew anybody to write little short summaries for them, for each of those faculty members, because it was very important. And you learned a lot from the history of the department, what these folks did as scientists, but also what they did in helping build the department to what it is today. So I think it's important not to forget their contributions. So we think about cost quite a bit. Sometimes we find ourselves being designers in places we aren't designers, for sure. But we've been fortunate to have our department. So whoever takes over EGI committee in the future, or is our staff in the department, we have everything recorded and documented, so it's easy to transition and update things in the future. Okay. Good. Yeah, we've only filled out the first floor. We have 3 floors of space.
Lots of space to fill. Okay.
Yeah, lots of space.
You mentioned in there at some point, students serving on committees. That's something I've been, thinking about, done a little bit with in my department. I would assume there are certain committees that are just kind of too top secret for students to be on. But are these undergraduates, graduate students, a mixture of both?
So on the EJI committee, we have 2 graduate students. We've had multiple graduate students. Some have graduated. So we have graduate students. I usually just put a call out to the students and ask them if they want to serve on this committee. And then I always ask them to say, make sure this is okay with your PI. before you join the committee, because it does take up work to do this. The way I organize this committee is that it's not time consuming, and we figure out, okay, this is going to take us, like, this is our year-long project. So I try to have an hour meeting every other week. And then the other thing that we do is only, like, I'm very organized with the time. It's like, okay, you should only work on this pre-work for 30 minutes, or this should take you no more than an hour to do this. So outside of the committee, you're not spending hours doing something, and you're usually working with teams of people. So it's multiple people working on something. So it's not something one person does. So our graduate students are not getting paid to do this. This is leadership experience. I wish I could pay them. That would be great. But also we have other ways of supporting them through awards in our department for service, right? So that's something I'm thinking about consciously, is fundraising. That's one of our goals, is fundraising, so that we can figure out ways to support our students who are doing this work, but also to give them awards for the work that they're doing, and also awards for mentoring and EJI service. We also have designed a medal. I didn't talk about that today, but we have a medal. So when we recognize folks in the department doing EJI work, to give them a medal for the work. And this work, we're still developing the criteria of it, but the idea is people that are doing work that changes policy or practice. So there are oftentimes some folks do fluff stuff. Everybody on this committee recognizes, and once you join this committee, it's work. It's emotional work. It's hard work. You are not a wallflower on this committee. We all agree, and I love it because all of the folks on this committee, they're invested. They show up. They do the homework. So as we're doing this work, we're also reading together, learning together. We read literature together. We do a lot of our own development as we're doing this work. And now we're at the stage where we're going to start sharing that development, that educational knowledge we're building to the rest of the department, to see, if this is going to help them. Obviously, other committees can come and consult with us, so it's not work they have to do alone. But we need to inspire and motivate and give resources to the rest of our community. The undergraduate, we have one undergraduate student. That undergraduate student is also on the Dean's Committee. So I think on the Dean's Equity Action Council, they actually get paid to serve on that committee. So anyway, I can find a way to pay the students, I will, because I think that, it's a lot to ask a student to serve on that committee, especially a first-gen student that's doing this work, and they're here because they care about it. But I think that's something to think about, and something I'm thinking about for the future.
Okay.
I learned that I can learn a lot if I have students on certain committees. So for example, advising, right? Or student success committee. I was on a student success committee for the Build Exito program, and we always had a student representative, because they will share something from a student's perspective that you don't know. Here's what we do. We're doing EJI work. Our stakeholders are a student, and we're making decisions for them. We did not include them in those decisions because we think we know what's best for them. No. We have students, so we're getting this perspective of a student, an undergrad student and grad students there. And then they can reach out to their people, their peers, and find out, right? They get more buy-in in student engagement. It is a powerful thing. I think we should not underestimate students. And of course, you can sign confidentiality agreements. Like our group has psychological safety built in. So what we say in our group, we are very open in that group. We know that we can trust each other, right? We can have difficult conversations. We can talk about something we've heard, and we know that we're not going to go around and expose people's identities or behavior. We just work on how we can strategically solve some of those problems. And that's really key.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. That's awesome. I did want to just mention, I'll jump it in the chat. I don't think it shows up in the video.
Okay.
But I did find your assessment quiz or something. I think it's under inclusive leaders assessment.com. now.
Uh-huh.
So it does still exist out there.
Oh, great. Because I wanted folks to take this. This is a really good assessment. I took it myself and I kind of figured out where I was. And of course, I'm on the advocacy stage right now, but I can always go back as I learn. And I think my engagement with my community and with the students really helped me think about students' perspective.
Mhm.
So that's always something I'm continually learning.
Yeah, I plan on once we finish up here, I'll take it myself and see what I can learn about me.